All right, welcome everybody to Tim Blackett and Friends, Season 2. This time around, I'm just trying to be more relaxed, more conversational, and hopefully more collaborative with my guests. All right, welcome everybody to Tim Blackett and Friends, Season 2. I don't know if you've been here along for the whole ride, but this time around, I'm just trying to be more relaxed, more conversational, and hopefully more collaborative with my guests. I have Emily Austin here again. She was the first ever on the show, and here she is, first ever on Season 2.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, welcome. Just as a brief introduction, Emily Austin is a Canadian writer. She lives in Ottawa right now. She's written 3 novels. Her latest just came out in January, I think, and 1 book of poetry. And as far as friends go, I know we've never met in real life, but I feel as much as one can be friends through social media and online, I feel like Emily Austin is one of my friends. So I'm glad to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for chatting with me. It's always nice chatting with you. I feel like because I've watched your TikToks, I feel like I've like FaceTimed with you a bunch.
Yeah.
You feel very familiar to me.
Yeah, that's how it feels for me too. So you're in Ottawa now, our nation's capital. Have you always lived in Ottawa, or?
No, I moved here for a job after university. I grew up in southern Ontario, like a small town not far from Toronto. What about you? Have you always been where you are?
Yeah, I was born in Saskatoon, and then my family moved here when I was a wee baby, 1 year old.
Oh, okay.
I spent a year in Indiana and a year in Alberta, around near Calgary, but I always get sucked back to Regina. Yeah, and now my kids are here and they're going to school, so I got to wait till they're doing their own thing before I can take off to other locales. But
are you in? Do you want to? Is that?
I've always wanted to, like my entire teenage years. I was like, I'm never living in Regina as an adult. But then things happened and I kind of got stuck here. But it's a good place. I'm mostly happy here.
Yeah, so, I've never been before. It seems like I'm interested to see. I haven't been to the west coast of Canada at all.
Oh yeah, it's opposite for me. I spent 5 hours in the Toronto airport once.
Oh, that's the worst airport too.
Yeah. Horrible. And I did go on 1 5-day trip to Montreal, so that was
cool. Montreal is nice.
Yeah. And then besides that, I haven't been east of Brandon, Manitoba. Yeah. But so one day I'll make it over there and hang out in Toronto and go to real bookstores and stuff. But
yeah.
So for this new season, I'm calling it a bit of a listicle season, where together, as you know, we've talked about lists of books that we could talk about, and each of us brings some books and talks about why they're on the list, why we like them, why we want to talk about them. And so during our discussions, we landed on a list of funny books about sad people. And I'm happy with that idea. I think it could open some good conversations. And of course, I think your books fit nicely into that category. So
thanks.
I guess to start, do you want to start with one of the books you brought?
Sure.
And I guess we'll do a brief synopsis and just, I guess, why you put it on the list and what we enjoy about it. And we'll just go from there.
Sounds good. Okay, so the first one that I thought of is a sort of recent release. It's called I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. This is a character-driven office comedy about an administrative worker who accidentally gets access to all of her coworkers' private emails and DMs and uses that to get intel to save her job. Have you read that one yet?
I haven't. It's on my list, but
it's funny.
I think I'll get to it soon.
Yeah, it's good. It's a debut novel by a Canadian writer who's based in Calgary.
Okay.
The main character's name is Jolene. She's like a flawed but endearing character, I think. I always find I tend to think people are endearing, and then when I look at reviews, people are like, this is the worst person. So take it with a grain of salt. But she's very lonely is a big part of the story. She's like very isolated. She's Iranian, and the expectations of her mom and culture are part of what's explored in the book, which I thought was interesting. And it deals with mental health and loneliness, but it's also very funny and sweet in a lot of ways. And there's a significant emotional punch.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're thinking of these books, funny books about sad people, it feels like it's a bit of a genre in and of itself or something. Like there's quite a few books that I think are that fit that mold.
Yeah.
But I was just trying to figure out what, as I was looking for books to put on the list, I was trying to think like what makes something funny and sad at the same time. It might be like impossible to pinpoint, but like
Yeah.
what do you think of that? Like I know your own books do this too. I guess you could talk about it as a from a writer's perspective or from a reader's perspective. Like how how do you think these things blend? Like why is it so interesting when they blend?
I think, I mean, I think it's also very subjective because um I find that sometimes I've found something very funny and sad, and other people are like, this was just sad. Or,
Mm-hmm.
like there I think it depends on, I think if you relate a little bit sometimes, when I think of the books that I have here, I think like, oh yeah, like if it resonates a bit with you, if the character's
Mm-hmm.
behavior is something that you can see yourself in, and then you can see a little bit of humor in them being self-deprecating, for example. Um, I don't know. I also think that I mean, obviously humor is a coping mechanism, and it makes, in terms of books, it makes we're also trying to be entertained to a certain degree when we're reading. And so
Mm-hmm.
it would be difficult to, for me, even though I have definitely read some books that were just purely really sad, but that that's harder to read for me. I prefer to read something that gives me a breath of fresh air every once in a while with a bit of humor. What do you think, though? What's your
Yeah, I feel similarly. Like I tried to read A Little Life last year.
Yes, that's a good example of one.
I had I have several or even many people on TikToks asking what I think of A Little Life.
Right.
And even if I type in Tim Blackett in the search bar, one of the top things is
Oh, that interesting.
Tim
Okay.
Blackett Little Life. So that's why I was trying to read it because people. But yeah, I only made it like 50 pages in, and I was just like, I feel very sad. And
It's
then most of the reviews said the same thing. It's just like trauma
doesn't get
after
less sad.
trauma.
Yeah, it just
So
goes
I,
deeper.
I'm not saying I'll never read that, but it's just been put to the side for a bit because, yeah, I think what you're saying as humor as a coping mechanism, I think even in a book that's very sad, you need something to like pull you up a little bit so that
Yeah.
it's like quicksand. You get a little pulled up and then you can sink a little bit lower and get pulled up.
Yeah. That book
But
definitely doesn't pull you up, though.
yeah,
Yeah, you got to be prepared to really be sucked down with that.
yeah. And then
That one.
it's so long too, so I was like, I don't know if I want to spend
It's a
this
bad
much time.
headspace. Yeah, like I don't, it's definitely not a book I would ever reread. It's
Yeah.
yeah, not a good headspace book.
But speaking of how you said sometimes you think things are funny and sad, and other people are saying they're just sad. When I brought What
Oh
Remains of Elsie
yes.
Jane.
Yes, I love
Of
that book.
course, you've read this. You
Yeah.
blurbed the book. Um, I think this is a good example. When I was
Yeah.
talking to her about the book, this is What Remains of Elsie Jane by Chelsea Wakeland. Um, there's one bit toward the end where one of her family members is sick and she's losing her limbs. They have to be amputated. So at one time, I think she's lost all four limbs, and she talks about how her helper has to carry her around like a suitcase. And this made me laugh so hard, but also, it's that's a devastating thing to have happen. And and when we were talking to her about it, that was actually based on something. in real life in her family.
Oh
So
no.
again, she thought it was funny, or the way she presented it was a coping mechanism to deal with the seriousness of it. But people in her family were very, how could you make light of this
Oh,
in a book like that? And
right.
so that was interesting, because obviously for them in real life it might be a really sad and devastating thing, but to write about it makes it funny.
It does, and I also think like it might be like a personality thing because I would hope, I mean, I don't know, but I would hope that if I had all my limbs amputated, I hope
Yeah.
that I would be able to find some, I mean, obviously that is so devastating, but you would
Hmm.
hope that there would be some moment when you could be like, okay, I'm gonna have to joke about this
Yeah.
a little, you know?
Yeah. I think so too. I hope I'd be like that too. I'm sure there'd be times where I'd feel very angry inside,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
like life's unfair, but to joke about it might help too.
You have to, I think, right? That would be, yeah. That's a
So
good
in
yeah.
regards to that, like uh I guess real life versus in fiction, and we think about if the things that happened in our fiction were happening in real life, there might be a different, we might take have a different take on everything. Do
Yeah.
you think that's true, or the characters in your books, maybe, are they, do they act the way you might act if these things were happening to them, or do you think there's something about turning it into a fiction that makes it allowable, we're allowed to poke fun at these serious topics?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I mean, sometimes they do things that I would never do. Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't work in a Catholic church, regardless of my, like that wouldn't have happened. And I wouldn't, yeah, there's lots of things I definitely wouldn't do, but I could imagine doing those things. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
normally am sort of leaning really hard into imagining, okay, if I really um had a particular phobia and I had these particular qualities, would I potentially be inclined to climb out my window rather than go out my door? Yeah, I probably would. But yeah, what about you? Do you feel like you're writing characters that are behaving in ways you can imagine yourself behaving?
Yeah, I think very similarly that like most of my characters do things that I would never do. Like one stabs her partner in the eye with a knitting needle.
Right.
I
I would
probably
hope not.
wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But they're all things that I don't know if I have actually imagined myself doing, but like in where the story went and the character was going, I felt like this is almost a natural conclusion to where they were going. So yeah, I guess as much as writers sometimes try to distance themselves from their fiction and say no, it's not me, I think that it's just inevitable that our own reactions or whatever end up
To a
in the
certain
book,
extent,
to
yeah.
a certain,
Yeah,
like it's obviously not actually us and not actually the things we'll do, but the everything's coming from our little brain, and
exactly.
so our imagination takes things to their logical or illogical conclusion, and
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I have had instances where people have said, "Oh, like it's not believable." Like even when I'm editing, them like sometimes an editor will be like, "It's not believable that someone would do that," and I'm like, "I do that." Like, oh no. I don't say that though. I'm like, "Okay, if you don't think it's
Yeah,
believable, we're gonna change it." But in my head, I'm like, "That's
yeah.
that's where I would do that." But yeah.
Well, I had a creative writing prof early on in my career as I was trying to figure writing out. I wrote a story that was almost entirely true that someone had told me about their own life,
Oh.
and it was outrageous. They had experienced some terrible things or whatever. But when I submitted it in the workshop, the prof said the same thing. I just don't believe any of this happened. And then I was gonna like object. She was like, "I know you're gonna tell me this is a true story," and I was like, "Well, it is a true story." And she's like, "The thing about fiction is sometimes just because it happened in real life doesn't make it good fiction,
Right.
and you have to figure out where the artifice is and what you want to say through this story. Sometimes shit in real life just happens, and there's no
Right.
there's nothing to it, but fiction needs to like say something about it. So
Yeah.
that was, I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned from creative writing classes was like,
Good takeaway.
yeah, we gotta. So I've never written anything, even when I'm writing about myself in a way that's supposed to be true.
Hmm.
I've never really written anything exactly as it happened
Right.
since then, because I want to get to the truth of
Let it,
things rather than
yeah.
the facts of things.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe just I'll mention briefly for those who don't know you that your books, when you said you'll never work at a Catholic church, that's in reference to everyone in this room will one day be dead, someday be dead, in which a atheist lesbian sort of accidentally gets a job at a Catholic church. So that's funny in and of itself. And then even interesting facts about space. A very anxious woman has an irrational fear of bald men, and she believes a bald man is stalking her. So again, that's funny, in a book sense. But then if you actually had an irrational fear and you thought a bald man was following you, that would be like very
Very
scary and
yes.
very upsetting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And your latest, We Could Be Rats, which I just finished, by the way, and I loved it
Ah,
very
that's
much.
fun. Ah, thank
Uh,
you.
it's about a woman or a pair of women who are depressed and trying to figure out how to explain that depression to each other. So it feels a little different than the other two, but it's at the same time dealing with these very serious themes, but also very funny. I loved this book
Ah,
again.
thanks for reading it.
Yeah. I feel like your first two felt very Emily Austin. Like you go from one to the next, and you're like, yes, this is the same person wrote this, and these, which is why then this was an auto buy because I loved those so much, even though you sent me the copy for free. um, and this one too, I feel like Emily Austin wrote it, but it's moving in a different direction. I feel like, at least, I mean, very obviously, formally, it's written as a series of letters back and forth, kind of. So it's different in that sense, but it also felt like a jump into something different than the first two. And I'm just wondering, going into it, were you thinking, I want to try to do something a little different, or this was just the book that fell out of you, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did want to try to do something different with form. So I was writing, the first two books are sort of first person present tense, and I wanted to write something a little different. So this one, but I still like to be in the mind of a character because I'm a
Yeah.
character driven writer. So I thought I would try letters. And that gave like a fun, you know, it's different when you're in the head of a character because then when I write something, it's like that's what Gilda was thinking or that's what Enid was thinking. There's no, that's what it is. We're in her head. But with letters, it's like, this is what she wrote for a particular audience in mind. And that adds an
Mm-hmm.
element into the writing that gave me more to work with in a fun way. So that was fun. But I do think it also kind of did just fall out of me also to a certain extent. I was writing it when I first started writing that book. I didn't think anything would happen with that one, especially because I tend to write lots of things at once and skip
Okay.
between them. And that one I was writing because it came easiest to me. But I thought as I was writing it, um, I thought, it's less um I just thought maybe it would be less marketable or people would like the publishing folks maybe wouldn't like it as much. So I
Mm.
actually wrote a really short draft of it and sent it to my agent way like when it was still really rough to be like, should I keep working on this or not? And so it was sort of a weird I thought I was doing it more as a writing exercise to begin with, I think, but then
Mm.
I got some encouragement halfway through and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to learn that you write a bunch of different projects at one time. I sort of do that. I usually have one main project, but then
Yeah.
there's like things and ideas that I sort of can't help. Like even though I'm working on a novel, I think my brain for so long has been thinking in short story form that I keep thinking of short stories.
Yeah.
So I try to write those here and there, and then I have another novel I edit here and there. But the thing is with me, when I have the central project and I start working on anything else, like there's this weird internal guilt where I'm like, you
Yeah.
need to finish that other thing. Like, how does this process work for you? Where you it's just the way you write, or you just
I
like
think it's
how do
because
you jump between?
yeah, I think it's because I have I don't think of I have sort of low confidence in the early drafts of things that I'm writing. So even if I think, oh, this is the primary thing, I get to a certain point where I'm like, no, this is terrible. I'm not working on this. So I move on to something else thinking I got to start fresh.
Mm,
But then inevitably I get to the same stage with the next thing. And then I'm like, maybe I'll go back to that. And I just jump between them, and it's sort of a race to see which one makes it to the end.
cool.
Yeah.
I also get to that spot in every project where, you know, maybe I'm a little bit different because at the beginning of everything, I think, oh, this is going to be the next, this is going to put Tim Blackett on the map.
I
And then
love
I
that.
get,
That's a good perspective.
but then I get somewhere where I'm like, oh, actually, this is just a steaming pile of hot garbage. So then I put it to the side for a while and I work on something else maybe. But then every now and then I'll come back to a project and read it and I'll be like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Let's try to finish this up. But it's a weird thing, as I think most artists are like this, where you have to have a certain amount of ego to think I'm gonna write this thing that other people want to write or paint this thing or like,
Right. Yeah.
and we all have, at least I do, ideas of grandeur where we want to make this our life where we're making a living at it and
Right.
people know us as writers or whatever. But then there's also that part of me that's like, actually nothing you have done is worthwhile, and how dare you put it out in the world,
Well, it's
kind of
nice
thing.
to know that we have the same horrible little voices in our heads.
Yeah, yeah, the life of a artist, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's part of it.
So maybe we'll move on to your next book here.
Okay.
Well,
Um, all right. My next one is Never Been Better by Leanne Toshiko Simpson. This one it's a romantic comedy about three friends who met in a psych ward, and the author's really open about her own mental health, and she has experienced being in inpatient care. So the story follows Dee, Misa, and Matt. A year has passed since they were in the psych ward, and Matt and Misa are getting married in Turks and Caicos. And Dee realizes that she thinks she's in love with Matt. So she goes to this resort for their wedding with her sister, and her sister's a really funny character. Like adds a lot of I don't know charm to the book. She's really funny. And the story is about Dee struggling with this idea that she's in love with Matt and with her recovery. So it's really funny, but it also deals with the topic of mental health in a really realistic and honest way. And I've chatted with Leanne quite a bit, and one thing she said is that when she was released from inpatient care, she was looking for books to read, and a lot of them sort of dealt with I don't want to put words in her mouth, so take this all with a grain of salt because I'm
mhm,
paraphrasing what she said. But a lot of books were not in the tone that she wanted. She wanted to read something that was like actually represented that experience, but it also was sort of uplifting and light and good, like more like healthy for you when you're in that sort of mindset.
mhm,
And it's titled Never Been Better because it's playing on how we have this instinct to say I've never been better when people when people are saying how are you doing,
yeah,
but it's also reflecting on how when you're recovering from something like mental illness you've never been better, you don't become better, right? So
mhm,
it's got a great tone to it. It's very funny, and it deals with mental illness in a way that is honest and sincere in a good way, but isn't, it's a bright read. It's a happy,
cool.
funny read. Yeah.
I'm gonna add that to my list too. It
Yeah, it's
was it was interesting when you sent me your list. I don't think I've read any on your
oh,
list.
oh, I'm surprised to hear that. I always feel like you asked for recommended books for your birthday, and I was like, oh
Yeah,
man, I don't know what to recommend. I feel like you've read everything.
yeah. A lot of people think that, and I know I have read a lot of books, but even at the library now, I'm working at the public library.
Yeah.
It's Freedom to Read Week.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So we're talking about banned books and everything. And we have this little like contest. It's like almost like count the jelly beans in a jar,
Oh, yeah.
except for we cut lines from this one book out of it. So it's full
Okay.
of just little papers. You get to read little
Oh, cool. Yeah.
tidbits and glimpses, and you have to try to guess. And if you can't guess from the words, there's a clue on the bottom. And the clue on the bottom was a bird in a cage singing with the door open.
Oh, yeah.
So I was trying to figure it out from the words and everything. And I'm like, man, I had some ideas, but I wasn't quite sure. And then I looked at the bottom and I'm like, oh, of course it's Maya Angelou.
Right. Why the cage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but everyone there was like, I can't believe you didn't get it. I can't believe it. I'm like, well, I haven't actually read that one yet. So,
Right.
and so then everyone's like, what? I'm like, well, I haven't read everything. So,
There's so many books on the earth. It's
yeah,
hard.
there's too many,
Yeah.
but it's also on my list. In fact, it's on my shelf, but yeah. Um,
What's your next recommended book?
okay. I think it fits nicely. Of course, they all do because they're themed.
Yes.
But this I brought A Long Way Down by Nick Hornby.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read that.
No, I haven't.
Nick Hornby, I feel like a lot of his books could fit in this, like High Fidelity.
Oh, yeah.
The dude is pretty down and out, but he's also kind of hilarious, but kind of also an asshole. In this one, there's four people who all meet on the same roof on the same day, which is New Year's Eve,
Yes. Yeah.
and they've all planned to jump off for New Year's. But because they're all there and they're all like, what the hell? This is supposed to be my spot. It's a very popular spot, apparently. They end up having sort of they talk each other down and they end up saying, let's not do this today. In 3 months, we'll reconvene and decide we can do it if we want or move on. And so in those 3 months, they sort of connect with each other and they decide again, we're not going to it. Then it's like a whole year or so of them almost like a found family shit. Like they're all miserable, but they're all kind of changing each other's lives and they end up being supports for each other when they don't have anyone else. Like that's much of the reason why they were all there and everything. So again, not a very fun topic for people want to kill themselves on a day that everyone else is celebrating the new year or whatever.
Right.
It's pretty sad, but then it turns into it's actually like hilarious. I bought the
Sounds
book.
actually, now that you've said the premise, well, the premise is amazing, but it sounds so familiar to me now. So maybe I did read it and forgot, or maybe I heard someone. Maybe I've heard. Have you talked about it? Maybe
I have talked about
okay.
it
Maybe I've
here and
heard.
there, and they made it into a movie. Pierce Brosnan is in it. That's all I can remember.
Okay.
And the movie's pretty good. I think it's pretty uh, faithful to the text. But
Oh,
there's something about Nick Hornby's writing that makes me laugh. He wrote about a boy too, which is a movie with Hugh Grant, who was one of my favorites. So
oh yeah.
anyway, but I had a point when you were talking about this last book. Oh yeah, books that are talking about mental health in a realistic way, but are also like not just hopeless the
Mhm.
way a depressed person often feels, or anxious people, or however.
Mhm.
Uh, so these books on this list and many others are actually like very for someone who is depressed and anxious, like they're like soothing for me, or to see someone dealing with many of the same things I'm dealing with in a way that resonates with me, but then also is able to like make it funny, then I think maybe life isn't that bad.
Yeah. Aw, yeah.
And so I just love these sorts of books, and I'm glad that this is the list we've chosen. I guess let's talk about your work some more.
Okay.
When you're setting out to write these books, I know it's a mystery for writers, it's a very mystical thing, but did you think in your mind, I want to be funny when I'm writing these books, or I want to talk about these mental health issues when I'm writing these books, or how does it come by? Does it just come by for me, it's often a character that is like sort of semi-formed in my head, and I just want to think about that character, and it turns into a story. But
Right.
are you purposely trying to be funny, or is that natural for you, or is it?
You know, normally I act like, to be honest, when I start to write a book, I do think, oh, I want to write a funny book, and I don't want it to be, I want to read, because I love to read. Like when you read something that you really find funny, I find that's my favorite kind of book. I'm always like,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. This is the best. So normally, like in my mind, I think that's my goal. I want to write something that's actually funny, and then I end up, for me, the reality sort of relates to what you were just saying there. I think one of the perks, I guess, of being someone who struggles with anxiety or depression is that there is a particular type of humor that we have access to, that people who don't have experience with that, and I think it's the people, potentially, I might be assuming, I think it's the people who read some of these books and say, oh, this isn't funny, this is just sad. But there's a real deep good humor to some parts of being depressed and anxious that is like my favorite kind of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of the best, it's one thing that I think, well, it sucks to be someone who, is depressed. It sucks that I have this. And sometimes I'll be interacting with people and realize, oh, this person has no mental illness. Like this person
Yeah.
is not anxious at all. And I find myself thinking like, wow, that would be, there were certain stages of my life where I would have thought, that's so lucky. Like I wish I could be that. But then I also find, this isn't always true, but I also find when I interact with someone like that for a long time, I think, you don't know something. Like
Yeah.
you're not on the same page about something that I'm on that I like. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
I feel exactly the same way. Like I've often thought about this when sort of trying to explain depression for maybe a family member or someone who wants to be supportive of this thing, and you're trying to explain, well, it feels kind of like this, and they
Mhm.
just look at me like blank stares, like they just cannot understand. So it's been very frustrating for me trying to like ask for help or accept support from people I know have never experienced this, because they end up coming with things like, maybe if you went for a walk every day,
Yeah.
you know, revolutionary ideas that
Yeah.
just make me very frustrated. But so maybe it's the same. If you've never felt these things or understood them, then you might not understand them in these books, the same as you don't really understand me in real life.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
and even I have some people in mind when I'm talking about this, and if I were to say you should read this book, it gives a good example of mental health or depression, but it's also like uplifting and funny. I just don't think they would think these books are funny.
Exactly.
They'd be very confused, even like wondering, am I supposed to be offended at this because you can't take this stuff so lightly?
Exactly.
But part of it is that's what you got to do.
Yeah. I have a rec that's really related to that actually. So
Okay,
have you read Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine?
I haven't. I
Okay.
I borrowed it from the library a long time ago, and I read about the first half, but things got in the way, and I had to return it, and then I've never gone back to it. But again, that is also on my list.
It's a good example of a book that I find some people will respond by saying like, this isn't funny. Like this is about a very um lonely, strange person. Like this is so not like funny. And the
Hmm.
main character in that book is funny in a way that is she has like an unconscious wit. So she is not necessarily telling you a joke, but it's funny, right?
Yeah.
So there are times where you're kind of, I could see how a certain person who doesn't see themselves in that character at all. I see myself in that character a lot, to be honest,
Yeah.
but who don't see themselves in that character at all, might feel like they're laughing at someone who is struggling, So
Hmm.
I can appreciate that to a certain extent. I can appreciate that if you were reading something that you didn't resonate with at all, and part of the humor was, in that case, like laughing at someone who's struggling socially or has a strange perspective because they're socially, unique. I could see why you might struggle to find humor in that. But if you relate in any way to that, it's so funny. It's
Hmm.
like, and it's a really funny book, I find. It's also really sad and dark in a lot of ways too.
Hmm.
But yeah, that one is about a character who is really isolated, has no friends, has a very strict routine, starts work at 8:30, buys a newspaper, spends her weekends eating frozen pizza, drinking vodka, and talking on the phone with her mom. But it also deals a lot with loneliness, but it deals with like ordinary human kindness in a way that is very endearing and sweet. So
Cool.
yeah.
I'm gonna move that one back up my list. Like, I have an endless list, but
Yeah.
that one's been there forever because I started it. But it's like almost because I started it, it feels almost like I've already
Right.
been with
I
that
get
book.
it.
So
Yeah.
there's more important ones. But now I'm gonna move it up.
That one is good. You do want to get that is one you want to get to the end on, to be honest. Yeah,
Okay.
you should
Yeah.
get to the end on that one.
Okay. I remembered what I was trying to remember when you were talking
Okay.
about the last book. You called it a romantic comedy to start.
Yes.
The one where
Yeah,
at the
it's
wedding. Uh
never been better.
Never been better. And so I recently have been reading a lot of romance novels. Uh,
Oh
they're
yeah.
all they're all rom-com. Like I
Okay.
haven't I haven't read any real sappy historical fiction
Right.
romance yet, but
Yeah.
these rom-coms. So would this book be like on in the romance section at the bookstore, or it's more
Um,
just like fiction, but it's a romantic comedy?
that's a good question. I think it could be.
Mm,
It definitely fits into the genre of a rom-com. I think it probably is in that section. I'm not sure though. It's also
yeah,
potentially not be because it does, but I guess
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I think it
Well,
would.
of course, we can go on and on about the ways publishers market
Yeah.
stuff, but so I've been in this rom com kick, and there's some books that I find, they're over in the romance section at Indigo, which is my
Mhm.
only bookstore in Regina.
Okay.
Uh, but then there's also some that I found off lists, best romantic comedies of the 2000s or something, and those books are in the just general fiction or
Oh, I
contemporary
don't know.
fiction things.
Yeah.
So, and so far I haven't found too much of a difference in that. I haven't been able to be like, okay, it makes sense this one's over here in general fiction versus over there. There's been a few that are just, I think they need to be in romance, but the ones that make it into the general fiction section, I'm like, why? I wonder why they put this here. But
Yeah.
uh,
I bet it does have to do with I think probably marketing, but
yeah,
yeah, because nothing really fits. Well, no, some things fit very perfectly in categories, but a lot
yeah,
of stuff doesn't. And in those cases, they probably determine it based on marketing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you read a lot of like classified romance novels, or do
I
you read any?
don't. No, not really. I have read a few, but it's normally because someone has asked me to blurb it maybe, and
Mm,
then when I read the description, I'm like, okay, that's
yeah,
every time I do, I think I should because it is nice to read something um and they're not always, but it's nice to read something
yeah,
that's sort of light in certain
yeah,
ways. I think it's especially when you do read, because I do find I'm occasionally sort of burnt out when I read too many books that are more heavy or,
yeah,
and it would be nice to, and
yeah,
it can still deal with like Never Been Better, for example, is great. It deals with, it's not like they're all light and not, you know,
yeah,
there's substance
yeah.
to it for sure, but it is a more pleasant read, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I found that with nearly all of the romance novels that I've read now, because most of my life I've just avoided them. You
Right.
know, I have a lit degree and I read literary fiction, and like
Right.
there's without meaning to, I've had this sort of pretentious
Right.
idea of what is
Yeah.
good work or whatever, and I've been like, no, I can't read those because they're not serious literature or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think Book Talk has changed things where people whose tastes align with mine pretty straightforwardly,
Mhm.
and everything they recommend I enjoy, but then all of a sudden they're reading this weird, quirky romance novel. I'm like, how does that work? So I think that's made me more open to reading these things. And now that I have, I'm kind of just surprised at how, they may not be literary works of genius, and they're not going to be like nominated for the Booker and stuff like that, but they're not just fluffy nonsense,
Yeah, there's lots of substance.
kissing and whatever else. Like all
Yeah.
the stories are talking about real characters. Kind of the essence of a romance novel, they kind of have to be character driven because you're thinking about
Yeah.
two characters that may not be from the outside meant for each other, but they're weird
Yeah.
character traits like come together, and it's just interesting. So that's kind of opened my brain up to maybe I should try some more genre fiction. So like the other day at the library, I was like wandering through the Western aisle,
Oh yeah.
and
I've definitely never read it.
I borrowed some straight up westerns. So I'm like,
Oh yeah.
maybe
That's
this
fun.
will have something to say about the world. But
I
I
bet
have,
there is. There's
yeah,
definitely the thing with a lot of genre fiction, it's when you're writing something that is supposed to meet certain genre conventions, you when there's some structure to what you're writing in that way, it gives you some creative opportunity to do
hmm,
things like, subvert certain
yeah,
conventions. Like there's things that really can make genre fiction really impactful and interesting. And yeah, I need to read more genre fiction too.
yeah. It's also, I don't think it's an accident or a coincidence that in the month of February, leading into February, like end of January, is when I've gravitated toward these kind of lighter books.
Yes.
February every year, I know this about myself, but it's always the month where I like slide into the deepest
Terrible month.
depths.
It's the
And
worst month. I totally agree. It's the
yeah,
worst month of the year.
and since I'm aware of it in January leading up to it, it's like I try to prepare myself, and I'm maybe going for an extra walk here and there, or I'm just like giving myself pep talks or whatever. But it's just something about it where, yeah, I just everything stops. Like I've only read like 3 books in February or whatever.
Yeah. It's just
Um,
there's a bad energy to it. It's the weather, the time of the year,
yeah,
the like events of it. Like there's nothing. It's very, yeah. You need to actively search for
right.
uplifting things in February.
And by the end of January, I'm like, okay, I'm done with winter. I'm ready for it to be done. But then also in Saskatchewan, at least, I'm like, we could still have 3 full months.
I know it's really
So,
bleak. Yeah, I
but
think February is the month that you should plan if you plan a trip or something.
yeah,
That's the month to do the trip.
yeah,
You
for
have something
sure.
to look forward to, and yeah,
But yeah, instead of vacationing, I've been escaping into
into rom-coms.
light rom coms. Yeah.
Yeah, that's smart.
Okay. Do you have another book,
I feel like it's your
or it's
turn.
my turn? It's my
Yeah.
turn. Okay. I brought this one. I don't. It doesn't. It might be an outlier from our list in that this woman in Margot's Got Money Troubles
Oh yeah.
isn't explicitly depressed or like they're not really talking about um, mental health issues necessarily.
Okay.
Maybe some postpartum depression. This is about a woman who is having a fling with a college professor. I
Okay.
think it's her own teacher, but
Okay.
she's not like interested in him or obsessed with him. This is the way some of those stories go in novels. It's just like
She just has
here or there they're just doing this thing,
right.
but she ends up getting pregnant,
Oh.
and she decides to keep the baby, and he basically says, like, together they sign a contract, he's out of the picture, it's just
Okay.
her. But now she's a young woman in her early 20s who has to have a baby, and she doesn't know how to make money and pay bills, and there's all kinds of things happening. And so she meets someone who has an OnlyFans, and
Okay. Yeah.
and she thinks, maybe I'll try that.
Right.
And so then she starts her OnlyFans, and then so that's also funny. And her dad is a former professional wrestler. and they've been
Okay.
estranged for a while, but he comes back into her life and he's living with her. So he, based on his like wrestling persona, has ideas of marketing. So he helps her like market her OnlyFans
Her only oh, no.
in
Okay.
a more efficient way. But then, of course, there's everyone around her, her mom and her people who are like, "How can you do this?
Right.
You're gonna ruin your life." So not exactly mental health issues, but I thought it was like a very interesting look at motherhood and maybe postpartum depression or issues where you might do things you wouldn't normally do,
Yeah.
but a young woman taking control of her life in a way that a lot of people look down on, but then also a lot of people do and pay to watch.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
it's like very normal, but also very stigmatized and
Yeah.
such a weird. But it's also just like very funny.
It sounds so good.
Yeah,
That book has been I've seen it, like, I've seen the cover and the title, but I never heard what it's about. Now I'm gonna read that for sure. That sounds amazing.
yeah. And so yeah, Ruthie Thorpe wrote it, and I've since then I bought one of her other books, and I called the others from the library, so they're coming. I'm going to
Oh,
try to
yeah.
read her work too.
Yeah.
So
That sounds great. All right, I can recommend the next. Okay, my next book is Sorry to Disrupt the Peace by Patrick Cottrell. It's a story about a character named Helen Morgan who has just discovered that her brother has died by suicide. Helen is a 32-year-old Korean woman who was adopted into a very religious family. And after getting the news about her brother, she goes to Milwaukee, which is where they're from, to investigate why he may have killed himself. And she goes through their childhood home, and she faces her estranged family and her brother's friends and this grief counselor. And the story is about her experiences, her experience going through grief, which is very unique and interesting. The book is like it's sort of surreal in some ways. I don't know if that's the right word, but it deals with mental illness. Helen is a strange and interesting character. The book is very funny at times, but it deals with grief and religious trauma, and yeah, it has a very interesting inner voice. It's Sorry to Disrupt the Peace.
hmm. That makes me think of how these books, most of them that we're talking about, do speak to mental health and mental health issues and everything. But then there is a section of this genre, if we're calling it that, that does think about grief, which isn't necessarily the same thing as depression. Like I'm thinking of What Remains of Elsie Jane, where the starting point of whatever anxiety and depression this character has comes from grief to begin with. And um, I don't know how to ask this question, I guess, but is like, do you think that dealing with grief do we do the same thing as when we're dealing with depression or whatever? I actually don't have a lot of uh, experience grieving. Like my
Yeah,
grandparents have passed, but I was never very close to my grandparents the way some people are. But
yeah,
I haven't had I've been very lucky thus far in that no one very close to me has. I've never experienced the depths of grief that it feels like people do in literature or people I've met in real life. But do you think there's a difference between laughing at grief and then laughing at our own mental health?
yeah. I haven't experienced grief the way that the character in that book has either. Like, I have lost people who were close to me, but always in a more like just what like someone who was older, or like
Mm,
even if they
yeah.
were very close to me. But I think so. I don't know how take my opinion with grain. I think it is probably different. There's some things that must be similar because there's this potentially. I think the thing with grief is that can be so all consuming and so disorienting in a
Hmm.
sudden way that you aren't necessarily, which can happen with mental illness too, but I think mental illness tends to be something that you at least the kind that I have, you kind of like microdose it like as a kid, maybe like you're a teenager,
Yeah.
you get a little bit of experience, you have some you have some experience when someone dies, especially in a situation where it was unexpected or like unfair, or they were young or whatever, or they were so close to you. It's like catastrophic in this
Hmm.
intense way that I think it is related to mental health, but it's a different, I think it is, it's probably a different feeling,
Hmm.
but yeah.
To me, it feels like, and this is just a weird like image I have of it in my brain.
Yeah.
It feels like depression for me is something that I'm like hauling around like a heavy sack or
Yes. Yes.
a heavy burden,
Yeah.
say, whereas grief from the ways people talk about it and describe it feels like this like thick fog that you're like walking through and you can't see the other side of it sort of.
Yeah.
So instead of like hauling it with you wherever you go, you're trying to get through this
And you might not, and you think
big
you
thing.
might not, and it's
Yeah.
I think there's also just the intensity of, and I guess it depends on your mental, I'm thinking of anxiety and depression. Maybe if you had a different type of mental illness that was more,
Hmm.
um, I don't know, like dramatic, like more intense in some way,
Yeah.
it might be different. But I think with grief, there is an intensity to it that is, like so emotionally, you know, dense, that it would
Hmm.
be different. Like with depression, there's a feeling of like, I don't care about anything, maybe. And you might have moments where you very deeply feel, apathetic potentially, or really self-hating, or whatever. But even when I think of, I haven't lost anyone who was like, like I've lost people who were older or sick, or like, in those situations. But I think a tiny bit of that feeling that I had felt somewhat similar to when you have like a breakup, only way worse, right? Like
Mm.
the sort of like misery of that, only
Yeah.
intensified so much worse. So yeah, I think there's an intensity to it that
Yeah.
differs. And it hopefully, I mean, I don't know how to talk. I'm not someone who has experienced this, but I do, it is something you learn to live with.
Hmm.
And I think it's always horrible, but it's not like, hopefully immobilizing permanently in a way that, it's something that you have to cope with in a
Yeah.
different way.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a clever segue into whatever I talk to next, but I don't know if I could get there.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk about before, as I was thinking about having you on, is your book, Gay Girl Prayers,
Oh yeah.
which is a book of poetry.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you think of that book, it's very different, obviously, poems, but you take scripture verses from the Bible and rewrite them or revise them a little bit to be more accepting and inclusive of the queer community
Hmm.
in general. I'm wondering if you thought of that book as fitting into the same sphere as your other books,
Oh yes.
or if what just in general. Because for me, someone who grew up very religious and sees, is familiar with most of the verses in there, it's funny to me in a way to
Yeah.
see what you're doing there. I also think it's very important and might be like life changing and affirming for a lot of people who come across it who might not have felt that acceptance and everything. But for me, it's funny because I know people who are still, wrapped up in that sort of
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
who when reading that would not think it's funny and
Right.
might be even angry about it, and
Yes. Yeah.
that makes me laugh. But I'm just wondering how you feel about that book, and does it fit into how does
I
it fit into this?
I do think that something I like when I'm reading poetry is I do like humor in poetry, especially in, like I think of poetry that is, deals with dark topics. If there is some, especially, it seems to be especially unexpected in poetry. Maybe that's just because of the poetry I'm reading, though. When I read
Mm-hmm.
a book of poems and I'm surprised by something being really funny in a poem, it's delight. I find that
Yeah.
delightful. I think that's I think that's great. I find that is like unexpected in a way that it sort of, makes it funnier, maybe. I do think yeah, I think like similarly with mental illness, I think religious trauma, there are some aspects to that. that's funny. Like there are,
Yeah.
especially frankly, especially when you're really thinking about like the absurdity of certain things. Some of it is so dark and really sad and terrible, but some of it is ridiculous to the point that you can get to a stage where when you're deconstructing, where you look back at things and you think that is hysterical. That is
Hmm.
such a funny. That's such a funny thing. Um, like I think of myself, I was like an altar server in Catholic school in mass, and I think of myself as like this little girl. I every time I would always, so at my church when you're an altar server, you could either be in this role where you were helping with the priests, like with the wine and the Eucharist and all of that, or you could be the person in charge of the projector. And I always wanted to be the person in charge of the projector because it was easier. And but every time I turn on the projector, it was one of those like maybe the technology is better now. It was one of those things where you had like a clear sheet of paper.
Yeah.
It was always upside down. So it would be like the hymn, I would hit it upside down every time. And it was so I was like so stressed by it. And the priest didn't find it funny. And so when I was a kid, that was like a stressful aspect to me. But now as an adult, I think that is so funny to think of 9-year-old me in a little gown, like messing up the hymns every morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is funny. I remember those projector things with
Yeah.
the big box with a light and then like a
Yeah.
mirror
We're
at
in
the top.
schools. Yeah.
It was so weird. And I remember too, I didn't have to do it regularly, but every now and then they'd ask me to help during like our chapel sessions on a Wednesday or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, mine were always upside down too because there's like two or three different mirrors and you're trying to figure out.
And
And
I always
so
would second guess myself. I'd be like, no,
yeah,
it's this way. And then
yeah.
it's
No,
opposite.
I did that last time, so I'm gonna do it this way. And then
Yeah.
it turns out, oh, damn it.
Yeah.
I think it's my turn for books.
And so, yeah.
So the next one I have is Less by Andrew Sean
Oh,
Greer.
yeah. That's a great one.
And this one is about a man who is a writer, but he feels like he's less successful than his counterparts in the writing sphere. He's also a gay man whose relationships have never really worked out the way he wanted to. And this one, it's just about him kind of traveling around promoting his work, but also meeting people and maybe sort of falling in love or whatever. And um, it was one of the first I thought of when we came up with this
Yeah.
idea
That's a good example.
because it's actually hilarious, this book. Like
It is.
when I think of it, that's the first thing I think is it's funny.
Yeah.
But then when you're actually reading it and like thinking about it, the character is actually not very happy with his life
Hmm.
at all.
Yeah.
Um, Even though it is a little strange that he thinks he's unsuccessful, but he's also like funding a world trip
Right.
from his writing. So I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
no big deal. But besides that, I got a kick out of this book. So you've read this one?
Yeah. I love that one too.
Yeah.
That is a really good example
Yeah.
of this. And the character is endearing and, funny. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you read the sequel?
I don't think I have. I think I need to. Have you
Yeah,
read it?
I haven't. I found this used, I think, at Valley Village,
Okay.
and then just started it, and then ended up loving it. So then I went and got the sequel, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I need to read it. I was excited for the sequel to come out, but it was one of those
Yeah,
things where I haven't read
it's
it yet.
weird how that happens.
Yeah.
You get so pumped for a book, and then,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know if we could get into this, but as like this is about a gay man,
Hmm.
and some of yours have talked about queer people. I'm wondering if there's an aspect of that part of your life that you think is easier to talk about with humor and or in fiction.
Oh
And
yeah, definitely. I think
yeah,
especially when you think of the like a lot of queer stuff is so nice, like is happy. And I think that was something I was trying to communicate in Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, that there's this
mm-hmm.
sometimes the way that being queer is talked about, it's the perspective is wrong, because it's often like the bright part in your life. It's so nice. It's like it's this
Yeah.
part. But obviously there are certain aspects to it when you're a kid in like Catholic school, for example, or in a different circumstance where it's not. But looking back on it, finding humor in that is definitely um I think that's relevant there for sure. I
Hmm.
grew up with had this experience that I think a lot of queer people have, where I had this group of friends who we didn't, no one thought they were queer, and growing up, looking back, we realized that they all were, kind of thing. And so there's often like this, we will talk about our like we'll talk about like the aesthetics of a Catholic church, like that's Catholic churches are very gay, and like talk about certain aspects to our, yeah, like our religious life that is hysterical, and it feels like drag, kind of like there's a definitely humor, and when you think about the parts of that that are difficult, the humor definitely is a good way to get through that. And I think it might be partly kind of related to what we were talking about in terms of like when you are struggling with depression or something, that you're sort of tapped into a certain kind of humor that some people don't seem to get access to. I think there is also a type of humor
Mm.
in in a queer community that maybe you can tap into outside, but that is sort of connective tissue. It's sort of a community connective thing
Yeah.
that that does build a lot off of the negative things, like when
Hmm.
someone is behaving really like is extremely homophobic or transphobic. That can be obviously, predominantly, that is very terrible, but that's also like the best setup for some of the funniest things I've ever read, like it's
Yeah.
often yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely humor there.
That makes sense. I remember on our in season one,
Yes.
we talked a little bit about uh, f- uh, Frog and Toad,
Oh yes, yeah,
and I saw a recent video where you showed us you have a
I do, yeah,
Frog
very,
and Toad
yeah,
tattoo.
yeah,
Back then, you said you liked how much Frog and Toad seemed queer coded to you,
yes.
but also I saw another TikTok, or maybe it was a Facebook post, I don't know, but it was talking about the recent splurge in banned books.
Yeah.
And this person was like, I don't think these people realize that many of their beloved children's books were written by queer people. And then there
Yes.
was like Where the Wild Things Are and Goodnight Moon, and
Right.
there was like a bunch of books, and one of them was Frog and Toad. And I just wanted to ask if you knew this, that the author of Frog and Toad came out as gay in his 70s or something
I
like that.
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's part of what makes it so sweet. I think
Yeah.
there's a, and I think his daughter has said things about that too, that there's like a reflection of that in
Hmm.
Frozen Toad for sure.
It's made me love Frog and Toad even more than I did.
When
Just
you think
the
of them as a little
yeah,
frog and toad.
it's like Burt and Ernie on Sesame Street.
It is.
Like
It's very similar.
no one has confirmed that, I don't think, but it just seems like to
Yeah.
think of them as a couple bickering all day long. It
Yeah,
seems so much more endearing than just
it
two
is.
buddies, two
Yeah.
buddy, two buddies who get mad at each other all the time. Like just get separate apartments.
Yeah, exactly. Why are you guys sharing a room?
But yeah, that's interesting. Um, do you have one left, or
I do, yeah.
yeah?
So I have Luster by Raven Lalani.
All
Uh,
right.
that one, this is about a character named Edie, who's a failed painter and a bad job and struggling. She's a young Black woman, which is relevant because she meets this white man named Eric, who is a middle aged guy with a family. And he's in an open marriage and has an adoptive Black daughter. So it deals a lot with sexism and racism. Um, and Edie as a character is very funny. There's certain lines in the book that it's the kind of thing where it's the kind of book where certain lines sort of stand out as like, that's so fun, that's hysterical, that's a funny way
Mhm.
to frame that. Even on one of the first pages, I can't remember what it is exactly, but there's a funny little comparison to maybe gerbils or something, I don't know, there's a funny voice there. Um, it also deals with loneliness, like a lot of the other books, but it's very sharp, deals with important topics in a clever way, and has a funny voice.
Cool.
Yeah,
That is also on my shelf, I think.
that's a good one. It's a quick read too.
Yeah, it stands out for me in this list. Well, because okay, all the books I've brought have sort of cartoony covers,
Mhm.
but Lester, from what I can remember, doesn't have cartoon characters on the front.
Oh yeah, I don't think it does.
So that that is neither here nor there. I'm just it's just
Just noticing a pattern. Yeah.
just noticing that. So if I were to like look at a shelf of books and try to guess what books fit into this category from their
Right.
covers, Luster would have missed the list, I think. But
That's true. Yeah. And it is maybe a little bit, it's the voice is what's funny in that more.
mm,
Like the, yeah, word choice and that kind of thing can be very funny in that book. But
I think that's the key to a funny narrative is
yeah,
whoever's telling the story either uh, is funny or like has a funny way of seeing things.
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
So,
That's a
yeah.
good point.
um, I'm wondering if you, in your books, if there's in any one of them, is there like one bit that like still makes you laugh or that you think is hilarious that you
In my own books.
in your own books?
I don't know. You know, to be honest, I can barely remember my own books when
Oh
I know
yeah,
when they're done. And it's weird because you spend so much time, you know, like you're like I'm
yeah.
obsessively writing it while I'm writing it, and then the editing process requires that you really go through it. But at this point, when I open it, even my most recent book, when I open it to a random page, I'm like, what? I don't remember that. So
Yeah.
I don't think, I don't know. I tend to find like um places where I find dialogue is where there's like an opportunity potentially to have a funny interaction.
Hmm.
And sometimes you surprise yourself there, especially when maybe invented a particular character and they're interacting with another character and you didn't expect, you know, sometimes you're writing something you don't expect it to go the way it goes.
Yeah.
And there have been a few times where I didn't expect something to go the way it went, and it like I was able to find something funny in the way in there, but it's sort of a vague answer. What about you? Do you do you have something that
Uh,
stands out?
yeah. Similarly, there's characters who speak a certain way or say something to another character that in my head is like hilarious, but maybe not isn't quite like obvious that it's a joke. It's like maybe my own inside joke or something.
Right.
But there's little bits. I guess I can't think of anything in particular either. But yeah, I guess along with that question is one that I started asking guests at, toward the end of season one
Okay.
as a finale because
Okay.
I kind of retired the whole section where it was specific to the author because I had more and more authors that I wasn't really familiar with, and so I couldn't think
Right.
of like
Huge effort.
funny games to play with them or whatever.
Right.
But I did start asking people after everything was said and done, is there anything about your work that you want to talk about or wish you could talk about, but no one in interviews ever asks you about them?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, nothing stands out in my mind because, to be honest, I'm often not. I don't think too much about the time when I get to talk about it. I probably should think about it
Mm,
more. That's something I should spend some time. I love to imagine like an argument that I could have with like someone not like unrelated to writing. That's the kind of thing I need to put myself in that sort of headspace and imagine that people are asking me about my book. But to be honest, I don't love that part of writing. I don't.
mm.
I saw something what was it that director recently died, that movie I
David Lynch.
yes, yeah, I keep
Yeah.
seeing like a still of him saying something like whenever I make a film, people always ask me about the film, but the film is talking or something like that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's maybe I just want to not talk, but
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
It reminds me of a story one of my English profs told me. It's probably apocryphal. I can't even remember what the author was, but he read a story, and then someone in the audience member asked him, "But what does the story mean?" or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he didn't say anything else at all. He just reread the story.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And
I think
sometimes,
part of I stop when I finish writing something, I stop thinking about it
yeah,
also. Like when I'm writing it, I'm thinking so much about it. And then I find I'm often caught off guard, or I'll be asked something and then when you're in like an in the spot interaction, I'll just say,
yeah,
I'll say something. It might not really even be the truth, but I'll say something. And then after I'll think about it and be like, oh no, like the actual truth when I was writing it was something a lot better than
yeah.
what I said, but I'm not in there anymore. So yeah.
Interesting. I have one last book.
Yes.
Have you read any Frederick Bachman?
I have, yes, that one in particular. That's a great one.
Anxious people. This is about a person who decides to rob a bank because they need to pay for their rent and bills in order to keep their kids after a divorce. They want to have visitation with their kids or whatever, and they need their space. So they rob a bank, and that turns into a mess where they end up, instead of robbing the bank, taking a group of people hostage, and we spend the whole book in an apartment uh, room with these group of people who are all weird and and funny and strange and lonely and depressed and angry at their partner in different ways. There's so much going on, right? I, I just I just laughed so much at this book, but also all of the characters in different ways I related to, and I think Frederick Bachman. I've only read two of his books, but it just seems like, on one hand, his books seem so simple. Like even his covers have cartoon characters on them and
Yeah.
stuff. But on the other hand, his stories are always so complex, and there's so many moving parts and things going on, and you think something's happening over here, but it's really the complete opposite and everything. And I don't know, I loved this book.
Yeah, I love that book too. He's funny and yeah, you're left thinking like, oh, there's like a smarts to it.
Yeah,
There's a intelligence.
and I think I judge books by their cover too much, but like every time or both times I've picked up his books, I guess I am expecting something from the book based
Yeah,
on what it looks like. That is just nothing like the actual book, and so
I agree. I kind of wish the covers were different. I
yeah,
don't, it's not what I would pick,
yeah,
but I guess it makes you, yeah, catches you by surprise when you,
true.
yeah.
I asked him to come on my podcast,
Oh, cool. Did you
and
get
I
okay?
got a message back from his publicist saying the project sounds very interesting and he'd love to come on, but can we do it closer to when his next book comes out? And
Oh,
so
cool.
that's
When's
come.
that?
I think it's fall this year.
Oh, that's so exciting. Oh my
So
God, that's gonna be so cool. I'm
yeah,
excited.
so I mean, it's not confirmed, and
Right.
sometimes those things fall through. But I hope. I mean, that would be cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man, that's awesome. He seems really funny. I've heard little snippets of him
Oh
talking.
yeah,
He's hysterical.
cool. I, I also have Nana Kwame Ajibrenia started following me on TikTok,
Ah, cool.
and we messaged back and forth a little bit, and then he said he wants to come on the pod, but
Aw.
it takes him like weeks or months to reply to each email.
Oh yeah. Not always
He's
going
a
on.
very busy, important
Yeah.
man, but so we'll see. Could be
That's
some
exciting.
other cool
Exciting season
guests.
on the pod for everyone.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
season 2 is gonna put Tim Blackett on the map.
Looking hot, yeah. You're already on the map though. I think you've got a great. It's nice that you're doing especially with the the scare with TikTok. You're doing a
Yeah,
good job making your, being available in other places. Good for you.
I'm trying, but it's hard. Like I keep telling people I'm doing work on bindery, and then
Yeah. It's
uh
tough, but
it's like
you've built a nice community there, so it's really
it,
it's
yeah,
yeah.
we'll see how it goes. I gotta keep that. It's like almost like a, if I don't see it, I don't think about it thing. And bindery is this place that I have to like actively go onto the internet and type in binary. It's not just something I can pull up here and do work
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
So when it's just, I have to consciously be like, people are waiting for stuff there. So I have to,
Actively, yeah.
so I have to be more consistent with that. But yeah, but I guess I don't have a fancy way of ending things, but I'm I'm grateful again that you decided to come on,
It's
and
always nice chatting with you.
yeah, I feel even more like we're friends after
We are, right? I think we could just say
today's
we're
pause.
friends.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll. Are you? I might be going to some. I can't remember. I'm going to some literary festivals. I don't know if they're in your area, but if
Hmm.
they are, do you ever go to those?
I do sometimes. I want to go to more. I went to one in Moose Jaw last year, and yeah, I've been looking at more of them, but I so far have not been invited to too many. The Moose Jaw people invited me, but
All right. Well,
yeah,
yeah. I feel like maybe someday we'll meet at some
yeah,
point.
or I'll come sleep on your couch in Ottawa.
Yeah, Ottawa has a Ottawa Writers Fest, so you should come. I have nothing to do with it, but I bet they'd love to
Cool.
have you.
Yeah, I want to go to more of them. I had lots of fun at the Moose Jaw one. Like, we're all nerds. We're all writers.
Yeah,
Everyone thinks of us as like introvert,
yeah,
kind of lonely, socially awkward, maybe. But so there's this weekend. It went Thursday to Sunday, but on Saturday we had uh, Brent Butt. He's the corner gas guy. I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Corner gas is a very big deal because it was filmed in Saskatchewan.
Yes, yeah. My family loved corner gas. It was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
Apparently, Brent wrote a thriller or a mystery or something.
Oh, okay.
So he was part of the festival here to promote that book, but as part of the weekend, he had a hour long comedy stand up
Yeah,
comedy bit.
yeah. Cool.
So everyone at the conference went to that, and I was like, Brent, but I don't know, but he actually was pretty funny.
You're
Like
entertained.
he was more funny than I expected. I got a real kick out of it. But that doesn't even matter for the story. After the comedy, I and Chantel, my partner, and a couple other friends went to karaoke
Okay.
in Moose Jaw,
Okay.
which is like a small town.
Right.
Well, it's a city, but it's like the
Right. A
smallest
smaller
city.
community. Yeah.
Um, so just a interesting little place, and I invited a bunch of these other introvert nerdy writers, and
Yeah.
some of these people came. There were probably like 10 of us that were there, and
Yeah.
some of them got uh like rowdy and out of control, and they're singing karaoke, and I was like, yeah, man, writers are real people too.
That's funny.
It was a lot of fun. So if I could go to more conferences like that and convince more nerds to sing karaoke with me, I think that'd be a pretty good life.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I
Yeah,
wouldn't sing karaoke, but I'd come
no,
to watch.
yeah, that's half the fun.
Yeah,
But
that
as
sounds
long as there's some people singing.
yeah. All
But
right.
all right, thanks so much,
Thanks for chatting with me.
and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, have a good
Okay,
rest of the day.
bye.
Bye.